Okay, so this recording is for showing you a few important, you can call this tricks to use Visio to draw ER diagram according to our class standard. I would not even say this is a textbook standard, but it's always a good idea that we all follow the same similar protocol to use the tool. So that way, from professor's perspective, it's easier for me to grade, right? From the student's perspective, if you work in the project, that you will see pretty soon that it's easier for you to collaborate with each other, right? So now the VCO, again, we're using the UIS Citrix desktop. The VCO is installed in both the Windows 10 and the Windows 10 GIS Oracle desktop. And what I have done is before the class, I opened up the GIS Oracle desktop. That is the desktop designed for actually, about 60% of the time used by this class, MIS 542. So we'll use that. And some of you will probably use this again in your data mining data warehouse class if you choose to select the MIS, I believe the number is 578 as your elective. Right, so to start a VCO, of course, you can always search or simply just type in VCO here, find VCO 2016, and we can start a VCO session. And the VCO download, if you have taken the MIS 552 class, we use Visio as a modeling tool to draw UML diagram. So if you have taken that class before, then this is the same software. And if you have downloaded a copy on your desktop, the newer version is 2019. And if you really need to have a copy by yourself, do try to go to the, I believe now it's called the Microsoft Azure developer website, or Azure, depending on how you pronounce it. It's one of those words that have multiple meaning. Azure, of course, is the Spanish word for blue, so it's probably used as words. And so if you pronounce in more like European ways, Azure, but I think a lot of Americans pronounce this as Azure. Okay, anyway, that's not our focus here. So once you start Visio, you have to always select the correct template before you go in to draw your diagram. And for our class, as well as in MIS 552, and maybe in your project management or business process management class as well. And the software category is the one we're going to be usually selecting. Now for ER diagram or ER model, and it can be, well, it can be drawn in a it's called a class diagram format, right? So a lot of computer science people, they like to use a UML class diagram to draw the picture. And there are, of course, called the chains database notation. This is the original database notation. And there are also, I think, another one called the ER diagram as well. But the one we're going to be using is called the Crowdfoot database notation. So we're going to be selecting that one and just create a blank notation or diagram there, and that will be the starting point of your ER diagram. For lecture purpose, I usually like to use different orientation. I usually like to have a landscape orientation so you can see it better. But you can choose any one of those orientation to be used. Now, if you examine the notation that I use in the Crowdfoot notation, you can see that there are only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different notation. So a lot of this extended ER diagram notation you read from the textbook, it will not show up in here. Okay, so why it's not showing up here? Because it's not common practice for regular database administrator to use that tool. And this ER diagram, even though that it says a Crowdfoot ER notation, it's not exactly ER diagram. It's more of something what we call the logical data model, right? Logical data model means that it's mapping to the table you're going to be using in the database environment. So last week when we lecture on chapter 5 to chapter 6, chapter 6 is about implementation. So some of the table that, or actually entity, you create in the ER diagram from conceptual model that is discussed in chapter 5, and you convert that into real database implementation. That process is go from the conceptual to logical, or conceptual to physical. But in any case, the diagram you are seeing here is more or less logical or physical than the conceptual. That's one of the something I hate to do that because it's not consistent with my mental structure or mental classification. But that is how practitioner is using. So most of the time when practitioner tells you that we are dealing with an ER diagram, we are actually dealing with this called the entity relationship model instead of ER diagram. Then this entity relationship model is already implementable. It's mapping one-to-one to your database, right? So that's one thing. Second is that if you have taken 552 already, you also learn that we are going to be using some of the, or configure the Visio software so you can read it better, right? So how do you do that? One thing, the first thing you do before you even start drawing anything is going to this view ribbon or view category of menu selections. Going to this thing called visual aids. And if you look at this, what my cursor is holding now, if you move to the corner, there is an option that you can see the entire visual aid. It says something about snap and glue option, right? So if you open this up, this will give you different way of control your Visio when you are using the Visio software itself. And two particular option I would like you to select is that when you look at the glue to option, make sure you collect the shape geometry. So the difference between not clicking this option compared to clicking this option is that this will help you to handle a more complicated ER diagram when you try to connect a lot of line to the entity, right? So if it's a simple diagram, it really doesn't matter. You can use the default, which is the line will connect it to something what they call the shape handler, or not shape handler, connection point. So on the shape, there are a few connection point. That's default. But if you select shape geometry, it give you more options of moving the line around, make the diagram more clear. So that is one you want to make sure you click. So that is one. And second is how do you adjust the line, the relationship, and so on and so forth. Now let's kind of make this our class standard. First of all, in ER diagram modeling, the first thing you need to do is identify something what we call candidate and entity group or class. And you can, as you can see that, well, without comparing to the textbook, this is the standard Visio standard crowdfoot notation. It does not have that shadow that we talked about in our previous lecture, and it has something that does not show up in ER diagrams called the PK, or primary key. So you have primary key already specified in the middle section, and the entity name is on top instead of outside of the block. So that's different from the textbook standard. And you have attribute following that thing. So this is the thing. So if you want to create something like a customer, right? And you can immediately write and say this is customer ID, right? Something like this, and you can even specify and something more specific. Say not null, or this is the variable, something like that, right? Well, actually, no. This should be it should be a sequence number, right? So you can specify, and from what you read about in chapter 5 and chapter 6, actually specific in chapter 6, other than the name of the attribute, or in this case primary key, you specify the constraint. In this case, not null constraint, meaning that it's required, and you have the sequence, meaning that it's surrogate key. Surrogate key means that it's an artificial number that we assign to it. Right, so that is a way we specify. And for the assignment purpose, because we're dealing with more at a conceptual level, there's no need to specify the data type and data domain. Just simply specify your attribute name, and it's recommended try to be as explicit as possible. So CID compared to customer ID is better, because when people read customer ID, they know what it means. When you say CID, it's not so good. It also depends on which environment. The environment we are dealing with here is not a very sophisticated developing environment. We do not have a data dictionary, so it will be a good idea just to be more specific in terms of naming the table name and the attribute name. Right, so that's one. Second, of course, that the most of the time we'll be building relationship among entity. So when you try to build entity, and we are going to be try to create relationship, and as you can probably see that we have only one relationship available here, right? So if you put the relationship here, you can say of course that, and this is only for demonstration purpose, and I'm just going to be connecting. So when you so this is a relationship you drag and drop from the stencil area to the diagram area, and obviously it's not so reading so well. And what I recommend, there are a couple of things before we start even drawing. One is the default design template for Visio is this blue grayish background color, and this is fine. But actually, to be honest with you, I'm not very happy with this particular template. And it's actually even better if you use only black and white. By the way, still a lot of organizations only have this laser black and white printer. So black and white or gray will be good. Or simply just, and I think the wireframe version isn't out. So I will select the black and white version or the gray version. That way that we can see better. Right? So that's one thing, configuration. So we have configured 3 things already. Make sure that you have the snap and glue select. Second, make sure you change the orientation to the way you feel easier to read. And it will be a good idea to use the landscape orientation. Again, like I say, it's easier for me to demo on a computer screen, because computer screen is not vertical in that way. Second is when you submit the assignment, it's easier for me to read your assignment. Right? So I'll recommend that. The third thing now is that when you draw this relationship line, and when you try to connect the line to the shape, right, and you can probably see that when you connect the line, there are multiple options. When I move the one line, or the connection from one end to the shape, now I'm pointing to the customer. When you move to different area of the shape, it will highlight different areas. So now it's highlight only the name of the table. If you move to the middle, you'll highlight the primary key. If you move to the lower part, it will highlight another key, and so on and so forth. If you move outside of the shape, it will highlight only the shape. You see that? And what I would recommend you to do is make the connection outside the shape of the picture. And that way it's easier to make the diagram look more organized, right? So connect to the shape, not to individual attribute, right? So make sure that you drop that correctly. And this is another reason I asked you to change that glue and snap feature. And you can play around this glue and snap feature to see how that will help you or prevent you from drawing a better diagram, right? So the difference between a person that you receive the training and the person just open up Microsoft Office and be able to draw a diagram is you can draw a more precise and prettier program, right? So that's one of the things. Prettier diagram always will please your audience. So make sure that you make effort to do that. Right, so that's a third thing. The fourth item before you draw, and this is what probably need to be done several times, is that if you look at the crowdfoot now, it doesn't. It's look relatively small compared to the entity, and you can change the notation by or size of the notation by modify the style of the shape. And to do that, highlight your relationship and right click on this relationship. You have two options. One is you can go into the shape style, right? If you go into the shape style, it will give you a lot of this option to change the size and thickness of the shape, and that is something that you can do first. And one of the things probably can be do is make it thicker, right? So for example, you use this line, make it thicker. Now it look, even though it look a little bit kind of awkward, but it's actually looking much more clear from the reader's perspective. And of course, you can fine tune by finding the best, the what you call the best thickness of the line. And of course, you can change the thickness of the line by further change that to the to different weight, right? So you can probably move down one notch and make it thicker, but not too thick. So this is probably the at least for now it looks pretty pleasing to me, and I can read it very carefully. I mean easily, not carefully. So that's 1, 2, 3, fourth thing. So change the line and the crowdfoot default, so you can see the crowdfoot notation much more clear. And the next thing to do is to learn a few things of setting up some of the property we learned from chapter 5 and chapter 6. And the first thing to do is, if you recall that we learned a concept called ID dependence and the non-ID dependent relationship. And the difference in terms of notation is non-ID dependent, or so-called a strong entity relationship, use dash line, right? And the default, of course, here you see is a solid line, and solid line in our textbook represent this ID dependent relationship. So we don't want to do that, and to change that. Some of you, without taking this class, what you might do is you'll probably go to the styles again, and of course you can change the line style by change this to dash. See that? But this is not recommended. Actually, the so-called ID dependent and non-ID dependent is already built into Visio stencil. To enable that, you have to learn the terminology using here. And the so-called ID dependent in Visio language, it's called identifying relationship. So there is an option. If you right click on the relationship, you see set identifying, and the default is click or select. If you unselect that, it becomes a dashed line. Right? So that is the default in the ER diagram standard in Microsoft Visio you have to learn. So this becomes a non-identifying or so-called non-ID dependent relationship. And after that, the last thing you need to know is to change the multiplicity. Multiplicity is also right-click on the relationship, and on each end of relationship you have 0 to 0 or more, 1 or more, 1 and only 1, 0, 1, and depends on the business rule we try to specify. You can change the beginning and the ending symbol for both of them. So let me try to change that from 0 or more to 1 to 1. And you see that on the left hand side of the line, it changed to 1 and 1. Right hand side is also 1 and 1. Right? So that is how you modify or play around this notation in the Visio environment. And I think that's and finally there's an option at the end of your right click in the relationship. It says something about the line, how do you connect the line in relationship. The default is the right angle connector, right? So let's keep it default. Over time, and at least my preference, right? So may not be everybody's preference. My preference is I like to use this right angle connector. Using the straight line connector or the curved line connector can make your diagram very messy, right? The curving line tends to quarrel with each other, and it creates this illusion of complexity. And one of the reason that we try to build model is try to reduce the complexity, so the audience or the reader, when they are seeing the diagram, they have a better sense of it. So if you use a more curving line or straight line may create a more artistic if you know how to control them, but psychologically it actually create more mental, though it's actually more complicated or complex in terms of representing the relationship we try to represent. Straight line is probably still okay, but if you go to curved line, it will create some sort of a mental cognitive load. I think that's the psychology terminology. And by the way, I was trying to write a paper about 10 years ago about how our brain processing the diagram, and because this is my research area. But anyway, that's going too far from what we are doing here to the reason why we are selecting this. So just use the default right angle will be good enough. So black and white, change the identifying non-identified instead of changing the dashed line, and using the snap and glue feature, and make sure you follow the naming convention, which is try to be more explicit as possible when you try to name the entity, and the attribute will be the preparation we do before we actually start building the ER diagram. All right, any comments and questions? And once we are done with that, we can start moving into our ER diagram. And of course, there are a couple of other notation you can use. You can always add in more attribute by drag and drop, and it will create multiple attribute to the notation here. And one of the things I think I'll try to avoid when we are building our model is we will not list all the attributes. We'll try to just identify the important one, because if you start working on this attribute in much detail very quickly, your ER diagram will become very complicated. So we'll just try to document the essential one, especially for this particular assignment, right? So that's something that you can do here. Any comments or questions before we start working on your assignment 7? Right, if not, I'm stopping this Visio preparation for ER diagram recording here, and we'll move on to the discussion of our assignment.